You know that feeling when you order a cheap, budget metal press off some random site, set it up in the shop, and within the first hour you're wrestling with a wobble that turns every punch into a guesswork exercise? I've been there, and the regret sticks around longer than the rust on the frame. That's why I spent a weekend actually pulling apart a few benches and reading every thread about the Baileigh 3-ton metal bench press before I hit record. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's start with the hesitation most of us feel before spending a few $100s on a piece of equipment that sits in the shop for months, if not years. The biggest risk is buying something that promises a 3-ton capacity but flexes under a light sheet of steel, or a press that looks solid on paper but ends up taking up a whole wall because it can't be moved. The Baileigh BP3 tries to solve those pain points by marrying a hefty welded steel chassis with a floor stand that rolls on lockable wheels. In practice, that means you can actually slide the whole unit out of a crowded bay and tuck it against the wall when it's not in use, rather than carving a permanent niche in your layout. Who should consider this press? If you're a small shop fabricator, a hobbyist who regularly punches, flares, or shears 12-inch workpieces, or a DIYer who's upgraded from hand tools to something that can handle a few £100 of metal without a hitch, the Baileigh fits right into that sweet spot. It's also a solid choice for a teaching environment where students need a reliable machine that won't surprise them with unexpected flex. On the flip side, if you're looking for a high-volume production press that runs 24/7, or you need a stroke longer than 3 inches for deep draws, you'll start hitting the limits of what this bench was designed to do. One of the first things I tested was the actual stroke. The spec says up to 3 inches. And in a real-world scenario that translates to being able to fully close on a 2.5-inch thick plate without the ram hitting the base. For most sheet metal operations, whether you're punching a 14-gauge panel or doing a quick flaring on a pipe stub, that's plenty. The slug ejector, a small but thoughtful addition, actually catches the spent piece after a punch, so you're not scrambling for the slug every time you finish a batch. In a shop where you're doing 10 or 15 punches a minute, that little convenience can shave seconds off each cycle and keep your workflow smoother. Now, let's talk about the hidden trade-off that's easy to miss in the spec sheet: the balance between rigidity and mobility. The heavy welded steel frame does an excellent job of keeping the ram steady even at the top of its 3-ton rating. When I applied a full load with a thick steel bar, there was barely a perceptible vibration, nothing like the chatter you get on lighter, all-aluminum presses. However, that same steel mass makes the unit feel substantial when you try to roll it across the shop floor. The lockable wheels do their job, but you'll need a clear path and a little muscle to get it moving initially. If you have a cramped layout with tight corners, you'll want to plan the placement carefully before you commit. The optional tooling is where the value really starts to shine. Baileigh offers add-ons for hole punching, flaring, and shearing that mount directly onto the same base. In practice, this means you can start with a simple punch set for basic work, then later expand to a shear without buying a completely new machine. That modularity is a cost saver for shops that grow incrementally. The downside is that you have to purchase the extra tooling separately, and the price tag for each module can add up if you need the full suite. It's not a surprise, but it's something to factor into your budget. Another practical consideration is the footprint. The bench occupies roughly the size of a standard workbench, but because it sits on a floor stand, you don't have to bolt it down. That's a blessing for renters or anyone who needs to clear the space for other projects. The downside, again, is that you lose the absolute rigidity you get from a bolted-down press. In my tests, the press held its position perfectly during normal use, but if you're applying a sudden, high-impact force like a rapid hammer stroke for a quick bend, you'll feel a faint shift. Most fabricators won't be hammering the press, but it's worth noting if you plan to combine it with other high-impact tools. What about the day-to-day usability? The control lever is ergonomically placed, and the ram moves smoothly thanks to the precision ground guide rails. There's no grinding or binding even after several hours of continuous punching. The slug ejector spring tension can be adjusted, which is a small but handy tweak if you're working with thicker materials that tend to stick. The only